You only have to scroll for about 10 seconds on social media before someone tells you to stop eating carbs. What's going on? Carbohydrates have somehow become the wellness industry's favorite villain. From insulin resistance to sugar addiction, there is a lot of fear and a lot of confusion. So should you actually be cutting carbs to protect your health? Today, we're sorting through the noise and breaking down what's real, what's exaggerated, and what you actually need to know about carbohydrates. And yes, we're going to talk about whether you need to give up pasta forever. Welcome to Nutrition Nuance with Dietitian Ann, the podcast where you'll get a direct answer to the nutrition question of the day in the first 5 minutes. We'll spend the rest of the episode unpacking the science and how it applies to your real life. I'm your host, Ann Kent. I'm a registered dietitian, a certified diabetes educator, and intuitive eating counselor with a master's degree in nutrition. My goal isn't just to give you answers, it's to equip you with the tools to understand and apply nutrition concepts to your life, honoring your autonomy as the expert of your own body. Let's answer today's question. The question we're asking today, are carbs really that bad for you, actually isn't the right question. What we really need to be asking is, which carbohydrates have positive health effects and which have negative ones? There are many different types of carbohydrates, and they all have unique effects on the body. As I review some of the common concerns about carbohydrates, I'll walk through how different forms of carbohydrates may or may not have these impacts. The top concerns that we'll address today are carbohydrates' role in diabetes and insulin resistance, sugar, quote, toxicity, and whether or not you even need to eat carbs anyway. Let's start with that last claim. Carbs aren't essential. To understand the nuance of this answer, let's look at how carbs work in the body. Carbohydrates' main job in the body is to provide energy. In fact, the brain runs on about 130 grams of carbohydrates per day. If you don't eat enough carbohydrates, you will make carbs from protein, or you'll use fat as an alternative energy source instead. That means that technically carbohydrates aren't essential because we can make carbs from other things. But there are symptoms of not eating enough, like brain fog, irritability, and fatigue. And there are also other benefits of eating carbohydrates. For example, eating enough carbohydrates is protein sparing, meaning that protein can be used as a building block instead of providing energy. And many foods with carbohydrates contain essential nutrients. One of the primary concerns about carbohydrates is related to diabetes and insulin resistance. That concern comes from the fact that eating carbohydrates directly impacts our blood glucose levels. When we eat starchy or sweet foods, the carbohydrates are broken down into monosaccharides, the smallest unit of a carbohydrate. These are then absorbed into the bloodstream, thus raising blood glucose or blood sugar levels. In healthy adults, when the blood sugar goes up, this signals the pancreas to produce insulin. Insulin is a hormone that unlocks cells in the body to let glucose in. So the blood delivers glucose to a cell, insulin comes along and unlocks the cell opens the little door and the glucose goes out of the blood, thus lowering blood glucose, and into the cell, thus bringing the cell energy. The degree to which blood sugar and insulin spike depends on the form of carbohydrate and the other nutrients that are present when you eat. Fat, fiber, and protein slow digestion and stretch how carbs affect your blood sugar. So yes, carbs do have an impact on blood sugar, but this doesn't mean that you need to avoid them. Instead, you want to focus on the quality of carbohydrates and include fat, fiber, and protein when you eat them. Another common claim online is that sugar is toxic, but sugar is not toxic in the way that alcohol or drugs are toxic to the body, in that they can cause direct harm or death when consumed in excess. But large amounts of simple sugars can disrupt metabolism and lead to an increased risk of chronic disease. Chronic high intakes of sugar can lead to metabolic dysregulation in the form of fatty liver disease, or NASH, which stands for non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, dyslipidemia, specifically high triglycerides, or decreased insulin sensitivity, which can lead to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. There has been a claim that sugar feeds cancer, but this isn't really true. There is an indirect risk of increasing cancer, but that is moderated by its role in obesity, insulin dysregulation, and chronic inflammation, rather than sugar directly feeding cancer cells, which it really doesn't do. In addition, high sugar intakes can displace nutrients. If you're eating simple sugars, then you might not have enough hunger to eat other more nutrient-dense foods. So the 2025 US Dietary Guidelines recommend to keep sugar to less than 10% of total daily calories, which equals about 50 grams for a 2,000 calorie diet. Additionally, the American Heart Association recommends to limit sugar-sweetened beverages to less than 1 serving per week. The bottom line is that carbohydrates are energy, and different forms of carbohydrates affect the body differently. Large amounts of simple carbohydrates or sugar can disrupt metabolism if consumed regularly. It's okay and perfectly healthy to eat carbohydrates as part of a balanced meal, especially when choosing minimally processed carbohydrates. And enjoy sugar in moderation. If you want to understand more about the why behind this nuance, stick around after the break when we'll dive deeper into how carbohydrates affect your health. Before we dig into today's topic, I want to share a quick resource in case you're thinking, okay, but how do I actually apply this in real life? That's exactly why I created my meal planning app, the Peas and Poppy Meal Guides. Each week, you get a flexible meal plan built around balanced nutrition and variety. You can adjust the meals to fit your preferences, and the app automatically creates your grocery list, so shopping is faster and easier. If you'd like help turning nutrition knowledge into real-life meals, you can try it for free at peasandpoppiness.com. All right, let's get into the nuance behind today's question. To make sense of the "are carbs bad" confusion, it helps to understand what carbohydrates are and how they work in the body. Carbohydrates are not created equally, and the different forms have different impacts on health. So what exactly are carbohydrates? Carbohydrates are one of 3 major macronutrients. The other macronutrients are protein and fat. Macronutrients are the large amounts of food that we eat, which are measured in grams rather than micro or milligrams like micronutrients. There are thousands, if not millions, of different carbohydrates that exist in nature. So it's impossible to group these all together, but they are lumped together because all of these are made up of 3 monosaccharides: glucose, which is the base of all starches, fructose, which gives foods its sweet taste, and galactose, which is found in milk. When digested, all carbohydrates are broken down into those 3 nutrients. Foods that contain carbohydrates are usually either starchy or they taste sweet. Starches are long chains of glucose plus glucose plus glucose plus glucose, etc. They're found in pasta, potatoes, corn, beans, bread, and other grains and starchy vegetables. Table sugar is 1 glucose plus 1 fructose. In sweet food, it's the fructose that makes them taste sweet. So corn syrup, honey, agave. Fructose is naturally occurring in fruit as well. In milk, it's lactose, which is the milk sugar, and this is made up of glucose plus galactose. It's present in human milk, cow's milk, goat milk, sheep milk, and all other milk. Fiber is also a carbohydrate, but it's one that we can't digest. Fiber is responsible for feeding our gut microbiome and keeping our digestive system healthy because it travels undigested through the small intestine where it reaches the large intestine and feeds our microbiome. Yes, fiber is a carbohydrate. It's only found in plant foods. Fiber is typically talked about separately, and we'll continue to do that in our discussion because the carbohydrates that we're really talking about are ones that provide us nutrients. So for our discussion, when I say carbs, I'm talking about starches and sweets. We established that carbohydrates are used as the primary energy source for the body and the brain, but how many carbs do you need? So unlike protein and certain types of fat, carbohydrates are not considered essential because we can make them from other things. And that's what the body does if you don't eat them. This is why people can go on the carnivore diet, eat next to no carbohydrates, and not perish. In fact, our body is designed to go without carbs because carbohydrates are short-term energy. We only store a limited amount, about 400 to 600 grams of carbohydrate in the body total. And so over an overnight fast, we actually use up most or all of that carbohydrate stores. When we run out of carbohydrates, we either break down fat for energy or we create glucose from protein. So when you don't eat carbs, your body either makes carbs for you or your body switches to an alternative energy source, namely ketones, which come from breaking down fat. But that doesn't mean that you might not feel the effects of longer term under eating carbohydrates. When you run out of stored carbohydrates and you're not eating them, symptoms include brain fog, low energy, irritability, and muscle weakness because your body is relying on a secondary energy source, i.e. ketones. If these sound like classic keto symptoms, you are right. This is these are key symptoms of the ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet is a very high fat, moderate protein, and very low carb diet. Usually we're talking about eating less than 50 grams of carbohydrates per day. Remember that the brain runs on 130 grams of carbohydrates. So we are far under eating what our body is used to using. At this level of carb restriction, fat is being used as energy, but it breaks down incompletely and leaves ketone bodies. That's where the name keto comes from ketones. Now I want to make a quick point that this is called normal ketosis, when these ketone bodies build up because we're using them for energy. This is different than diabetic ketoacidosis, which happens in the absence of insulin and can be life-threatening. When we're talking about the ketogenic diet, we're talking about ketosis in an otherwise healthy individual. In terms of the health of the keto diet, there's a big difference between short-term and long-term data. In the short term, when you're talking about someone going on the keto diet for several months, a lot of times we'll see improved insulin sensitivity, improved lipids, and reduction in hunger. But for people who stay on the ketogenic for longer of this, many of those numbers turn around. We're talking about longer than 6 months. If you are on a very low carb, very high fat diet for longer than 6 months, many people start seeing higher cholesterol, especially LDL cholesterol, which is the lousy or bad cholesterol, a reduction in insulin sensitivity, which is the opposite of what you would have thought, and possible nutrient deficiencies because we're missing a lot of nutrients from carbohydrates, and also poor gut health because remember, fiber is a carbohydrate. Now, maybe you're thinking, well, this doesn't make sense. Our ancestors didn't eat carbs, so how is it bad if we go on a ketogenic diet? I want to first remind you that there's also a lot of other things that our ancestors didn't do, like drive cars or stare at screens all day or use moisturizer or eat strawberries in December. And our ancestors also didn't diagnose diseases like cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. And not to mention that the fact that this claim isn't even true. Ancestral and Paleolithic diets included a significant amount of carbohydrates from plant foods and processed wild grains, even tens of thousands of years before agriculture. So this argument about our ancestors not eating carbs and so we shouldn't either doesn't really have a lot of weight on our own. If we want to really answer this question, we need to ask other questions to validate if this matters or not. For example, what happens if you eat too many carbohydrates? And there has been a lot of research about this question, but it turns out that it's not really the amount, but rather the quality of carbohydrates and the context of the overall diet that determines the health. Because high carb diets that have a high fiber intake, around 25 to 29 grams of fiber per day, show a decreased risk of all kinds of chronic disease, including cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and colorectal cancer, among other types of cancer. The research also shows this benefit as fiber intake increases. So for every increase of 8 grams of fiber per day, there is an additional 5 to 27% risk reduction of those outcomes. Fiber from whole grains specifically appears to reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes and colorectal cancer incidence. Yes, whole grains are good for you. So if you're considering increasing fiber, which would be a brilliant idea, I encourage you to do so slowly. Remember that fiber feeds gut bacteria, and so you can have some gastrointestinal distress like gas or uncomfortable stool if you increase fiber too quickly, too much. Also make sure that you're getting adequate water and moving around to help your digestion move normally. I also want to note that fiber from food is usually better than supplements, and it's because of what's called the food matrix. That is how it's packaged in food along with all of the other things. Fiber from food means that you need to chew the food more, you need to digest it more, and that has an impact on all kinds of hormones in the body, including ones like GLP-1 and insulin. In terms of supplements, there's also lots of different forms of fiber. So the fiber supplement to choose depends on your desired effect. For cholesterol and blood sugar control specifically, you could consider psyllium, beta-glucan, or galactomannan. But again, if you're eating fiber from food, you're getting a wide variety of the types of fiber and having all of these benefits. On the other hand, what happens if you eat too many carbohydrates from simple sugars and refined grains? This can actually lead to metabolic dysregulation, specifically fatty liver disease or a buildup of fat on the liver. Dyslipidemia, specifically high triglycerides, and note that as little as 2 sodas per day can cause after meal high triglycerides, especially when consumed chronically. It can also cause decreased insulin sensitivity and lead to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. And high sugar intake can lead to chronic inflammation, defined as high levels of interleukin 6 and high sensitive C-reactive protein. These inflammatory markers are linked to atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease, metabolic dysfunction, and other age-related diseases. Chronically high sugar intake can also lead to a higher risk of cancer, specifically breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, and colorectal cancer. And again, that's mediated by those other chronic inflammatory processes that are happening in the body. So an example of this type of eating pattern would be those that are high in sugar-sweetened beverages like soda, sugary cereal, chips, pastries, and refined grains, especially if these are consumed in large amounts and without other foods. We're talking about consistent high intake. I don't want you to feel guilty for eating one dessert. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the overall pattern. So there's a big difference in an overall pattern of a high carbohydrate diet that includes lots of whole grains, lots of fruits, whole fruits and vegetables, and fiber and foods from whole plants, compared to a high carbohydrate diet that includes lots of highly processed and refined grains or simple sugars. Again, we're talking about patterns, not one meal. If you want to enjoy a sugar-sweetened beverage or a pastry or some of those refined grains, there are things that you can do to stabilize your blood sugar in that meal, which can help manage and mitigate that metabolic disease. Anytime you add foods to a simple carbohydrate, it changes the effect on blood sugar. Remember that fat, fiber, and protein all help to slow and stretch the effect of carbohydrates on blood sugar. A great example is taking a slice of white bread compared to a slice of white bread with peanut butter. You can think about this, that would be like, how that would change if you were eating that for breakfast. If you had a slice of white toast with nothing on it, just a piece of white toast, you know that it wouldn't keep you full for very long. And that's because that white bread is very simple, it's digested quickly, and you get a quick burst of energy, but it doesn't last very long. Adding peanut butter to the bread helps, which has a lot of fat and a decent amount of protein and some fiber, helps to slow down how fast the carbohydrates in the bread are digested, and it helps them to last longer in your bloodstream. So anytime you can include different foods in your meal, you can include refined starches and sweets, but you can add fat, fiber, or protein to your meal to help balance your blood sugar and stretch those carbohydrates so they have less of a severe impact on your blood sugar and you can stay full for longer. So, are carbs really that bad for you? The short answer is no, but the long answer is more nuanced. It depends on the type of carbohydrate, the other foods that you eat with it, and the overall amount of calories you eat compared to your body's needs. When it comes to carbohydrates, here's what I would actually do. I would balance my meals and snacks according to the healthy plate method, and I would focus on quality. The healthy plate divides the plate into a fourth plate of protein, a fourth plate of carbohydrate, and a half plate of plants. This is how I design every meal in the Peas and Poppy Meal Guides app. I intentionally pair foods together for optimal post-meal blood sugar. And then I double check the macros for you. I make sure that the amount of carbs in the meal is about 45 grams. The amount of fiber is 5 to 10 grams per meal. And you have an adequate source of protein between 20 to 30 grams per meal. I also make sure to include healthy fats to help slow that digestion of carbs and help you stay full for longer. Generally, I include all kinds of carbohydrates. I include whole grains and starchy vegetables, but I also include some white grains like white rice or sweets made with real sugar. The key is that I pair them thoughtfully and intentionally so that you can enjoy a wide variety of foods, flavors, and cuisines, and also honor your health. You can have both. You can love what you eat and nourish your body. The only thing I really avoid are sugar-sweetened beverages, except on the very rare occasion. Instead, I drink water or an occasionally artificially sweetened beverage. The social connections and cultural significance of food is really important too. It's okay and important to enjoy that slice of cherry pie. It's okay and important to celebrate with birthday cake. My message to you is to love what you eat, including carbohydrates. Thanks for listening to Nutrition Nuance with Dietitian Ann. If this episode helped you cut through some of the nutrition noise, I'd love it if you shared it with a friend or family member who might find it helpful too. And if you're looking for practical ways to apply what we talk about here, especially when it comes to planning balanced meals for real life, you can learn more about my meal planning app at peasandhappiness.com. Remember, nutrition isn't one size fits all, and you are the expert of your own body. I'll see you next week for another episode of Nutrition Nuance. The information provided in this podcast is for educational purposes only, directed at healthy adults, and is not intended as medical or nutritional advice. It does not replace consultation with a qualified healthcare provider or registered dietitian. Individual needs vary, and you should consult your own provider before making changes to your diet, especially if you are under the age of 18, are pregnant, nursing, have a medical condition, or take medication. The hosts and guests are not responsible for any actions taken based on this content. For questions, concerns, or ideas for other episodes, email us at podcast@peasandhappiness.com.